2021 was hands down the hardest year of my life, and here's why. Within 90 days, I had to make the decision to end life support for both of my parents at completely different times. No one tells you what happens after your parents die, especially when you're one of the people that's responsible for everything. My name is Ann Boyce, and in 2021, my brother Adam and I lost both of our parents within 3 months of each other. And they're one of the reasons why we started Flock and Company Real Estate, and we focus on helping those families who inherited homes. So to help you understand why this point in my life was so difficult, here's a little backstory. I had two young boys. They were 6 and 9 years old. I was the manager of two baseball teams. Living in Central Florida, we played baseball year-round, and the teams needed a manager. I played softball all my life. Their teams needed a coach, so I stepped up. My brother Adam and my mom and I, we all started Flock and Company actually in mid-2020, and we were working on getting the company off the ground. And then your basic, just normal, everyday life expectations. The kids were in school. I was working a different job. The middle of 2020 was deep into COVID with all the COVID protocols in place. So we were trying to navigate that. My brother Adam and I both live in Castleberry, Florida, actually in the same neighborhood, just around the corner from each other. And in late 2019, my mom also moved into the neighborhood. So we were all really close to each other. My kids going to her house almost every day after school, or her meeting them at the bus stop. It was really wonderful. Our dad, on the other hand, lived out of state in Cleveland. He lived there his whole life. You know, as children, we used to go and visit during the summers, my brother longer than I did. And as we got older, we knew that one day we were going to call his house and he wasn't going to answer. We were going to call again and he wasn't going to answer. And then that day came late in February 2021. My brother called, no one answered. He called a little later, no one answered. He tried one more time late in the evening, no one answered. So that's when we finally called for a wellness check, and the fire department went over and they found him. He was still alive, but it had been a couple of days since he had fallen. They were able to get him to the hospital, but he was very delicate at the time. So my brother and I booked the next soonest flight that we could to get up to Cleveland to figure out exactly what was going on in the situation. When my brother and I got to Cleveland, we were lucky enough to have a cousin who lived close by that was willing to allow us to stay with her indefinitely. She even had an extra car that we could borrow, as she had 3 sons and one was away for a little while, so they had an extra car, and we were really lucky in that aspect. So when we got there, we basically immediately went straight to the hospital. And you have to remember, in early 2021, the hospital had intense COVID protocols in place. And in this particular hospital, they would only allow one visitor at a time into my dad's room. So during the day, we would take turns spending time with my dad. It was really hard. I remember I brought my laptop and just some things to work on for the real estate business at the time to try and keep myself occupied while I was in his room, because for the most part, he was just laying there. He had feeding tubes, not down his throat, but just IVs to keep him hydrated. Every couple of hours, he would wake up asking, why was he here? You know, he liked it when I was able to sit close by his bedside. I do vividly remember, though, being in the room and him asking why my brother wasn't in the room too, and it was hard to explain why only one of us was allowed in at the time. Between visits, my brother and I would go and check on his house, because it had been years since we'd been allowed into the house. There was a point in time where my dad stopped letting us come to his house, probably because he was embarrassed by it. He didn't want us to see how he had been living. You know, we learned that it was a 2-story house, and he was mainly staying downstairs, and the condition of the house was severely deteriorating. He was sleeping on the couch, I know, using just other means for the bathroom, and it was just really eye-opening and heartbreaking, and really sad that my dad didn't let us in more to help, but he he just wouldn't. We tried several times and was just met with extreme resistance. And I fully believe that this is how he wanted it. So, that part is just the way it was. But we knew we were in a house that needed hundreds of $1,000s worth of work. My dad would tell one of us to go into the house and look for certain documents, and doing so was a difficult scavenger hunt as he had documents through the early 90s. Everything was in a filing system and labeled, but once he ran out of filing cabinet room, there were stacks and stacks and stacks in the master bedroom. One thing worth mentioning is if you have a family member who's not doing too good and making end-of-life plans, you may want to ask them if they have any hidden money in the house, especially in that generation. We came to find out my dad kept a money tin full of cash that he was saving specifically for me and my brother that I don't know if we would have found if he wasn't able to help guide us there. But it was a really difficult time, and it was really exhausting, and the added layer of COVID on top of it, only allowing me or my brother to be in the hospital room at a time, was just something indescribable. So after one of my visits to him, the nurses kept telling us, you have to figure out a way to get him to Florida and, get him into assisted living. And my brother and I were looking at each other like, this is crazy. Like, there is no way my dad looks like he is going to make it down to Florida. Came to find out in so many words that my dad had to say he did not want any care anymore. And once he said that, then we would transition into hospice services. So I had to explain to my brother what was said to me in so many words. And once my brother came to that realization, we had to explain to my dad. Well, as soon as we told my dad what he needed to say, he said, no more care, like immediately. And we were able to quickly transition to the hospice center where we were able to set up, or he had a wonderful room, looking at the woods. I remember he spent one night there, and deer and giant squirrels would come up to his door. And once we finally made that decision at the hospital, both my brother and I were finally allowed in his room until they were done getting the hospice transportation set up. And my dad kept saying, finally, both of you together, like he was just waiting. Because what he did is he kept a picture of my sons on his lap. My oldest son at the time colored a picture for him, for me to take with him, and he kept that on his lap. And every time he would take a nap, he would hold mine and my brother's hands. And I fully believe now that he was hoping he would just fall asleep like that. But in the hospital, he wasn't able to do that. Funny story though, when we got into hospice, my dad had been a smoker for years. And one of his last requests, my brother and I said, Dad, what do you want? Last request. Do you want a pizza? Do you want whatever you want? He said he wanted his specific pack of cigarettes. So I had to leave the hospice facility to head back to my dad's house because that's where his specific cigarettes were. And I had to find them and bring them back to the hospice facility. Clearly, there's no smoking in the hospice rooms, but my brother and I were determined not to deny our dad his one last dying wish. So what we did was we unhooked the bed and we wheeled it across the room to where the sliding glass door was. And we opened the sliding glass door. Now, mind you, it's late February, probably early March now, the first week of March in Cleveland, Ohio. So it's cold. But we get the door cracked open. We get the cigarette lit for my dad. He takes 2 puffs of it and he said, okay, all done. Because you got to remember, my dad was born in Yugoslavia, so he had a little bit of an accent. And my brother and I were like, no way. There's no way we just did this in his room for him to take 2 puffs. You have to imagine my brother standing with a pillow by the vent to make sure it doesn't get into the ventilation system, and I'm by the door venting the cigarette smoke out, all for 2 puffs. But, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. And we wheeled him back to his corner, got him all plugged in, and he was happy. I stayed there the rest of the evening because he did start to decline rapidly after that. And then in the next morning, my cousin, her husband, and then my other cousin who had passed away, his wife, all got into the room. My brother on one side, me on the other, my dad's grandson's picture and drawing in his lap, and holding both mine and my brother's hands, one hand in each. My dad slowly passed away. I think exactly the way he wanted. Not long after my dad had passed, the reality set in of my brother and I live in Florida, and he owned property in Cleveland, Ohio. So what we did before we left Cleveland, after his funeral, we ended up spending a good 3 weeks at my cousin's house. We did go to his house and secure it. We changed the locks. We notified his neighbors so the neighbors could help keep an eye on it for us. We took anything that seemed particularly valuable and then just made sure, like I said, everything else was secure. My brother grabbed paperwork that looked like it had important numbers or information on it because, we had to take over the utilities, the insurance. We had to make sure we had documents to call for his retirement and notify the proper people that he had passed away. So that's what we were looking for when we were in his house, to make sure we had everything we needed to head back to Florida. Luckily, my brother and I get along pretty well. A few years back, we made sure my dad had a will, so it named us as the personal representatives, and my brother was the executor of his will. And, so my brother took care of a lot of the phone calls to Cleveland, Ohio to make sure everything was in order. I was helping on the other end, calling, who I needed to call to notify for his retirement. And then my brother and I said, okay, let me wait till the end of the school year, early June, so that way I can be here for the kids for the rest of the school year, and then we'll head back up and we'll figure out the house. We'll deal with the house. And in our mind, because at that time we were running a real estate investment company, Flocken Company, we were more geared towards investing at that time, we were going to get my dad's house fixed up and we were going to rent it out, and it was going to be great because it was a property that was owned free and clear. So we just wanted to head up there and take any belongings that we wanted and then hire a contractor to get that property going. Now, I do have a video linked below that goes over what we did for renovations for my dad's house. However, once we got back, the most unexpected thing happened. Our mom passed away. So let's jump ahead from March 2021 to May 2021. All right, we had a wonderful Mother's Day at my house. We had my mom over, a couple friends from down the street. I remember we made a baked potato bar, and she brought over one of her favorite cakes from down the street. And we just had a really nice time hanging out by the pool and spending the day together and with the kids. She was planning for her trip to go to Charlotte, North Carolina, in that area, to visit her sister and her niece and her friend who lived in Rock Hill, South Carolina, not too far from Charlotte. And so I remember when my mom went on the trip, I want to say the third day she was there, I just had this nagging feeling that I needed to call her. So I called her and left a message because I think she was at dinner, and I just said, Mom, I just wanted to touch base and just tell you I love you, and I know you're probably out having fun, so don't worry about calling me. And knowing my mom, she called me right back in the middle of her dinner, and she and her friend were out at this restaurant, beautiful restaurant, she told me, overlooking a waterfall, having a wonderful time. That she was so glad that I called, and we both said I love you, and see you in a couple days. Then later that night, my phone rang, and it was her friend. See, it was 5 years ago, and it's still really hard. She said, I have news. Well, first I looked down at my phone and I told my husband, I said, this can't be good because there's no reason my mom's friend should be calling me at 9:30 at night. And it wasn't. She told me my mom had gone down, but that the paramedics had gotten her heartbeat back and she was being taken to the hospital. So immediately got a hold of my brother. We went down the street to her house to locate the important documents that she showed us that we needed to locate, because a few years earlier, when my stepdad passed away, she made sure she had everything in order and it was going to be easy for us to find. So we located her documents, her will and her living will, and a directive for if and when she was in a hospital on life support. And we took the next flight out in the morning to go to Charlotte, North Carolina. And again, so we were lucky enough to be able to stay with, we had a couple places to stay. We could stay with my aunt, we could stay with her mom, or my mom's friend that she was staying with, which is ultimately where we decided to stay just because she had the most space. Like my brother and I could each have a room um, and borrow a car again. And so again, because it was 2021, COVID hospital protocols were still in place. Now, the first visit, because she was in the ICU, they were nice enough and they let both me and my brother in at the same time. So the doctors and nurses could explain what was going on, that she was in a medically induced coma, almost frozen, per se, if I remember correctly, to try and preserve and to bring the swelling down in her brain because she was without oxygen for a while. Uh, and it was really hard. She didn't look good. And then after that first day, this hospital only let one visitor per day. At the hospital in Cleveland, you could switch out which visitor went in during the day, one at a time, but this hospital was one visitor per day. So each day it was either me or my brother, or I know her sister wanted to see her, but she let me or my brother in, and it was really hard because then the other one, was sitting downstairs waiting for hours, or you're sitting upstairs in a hospital room alone with your parent on life support, and it was just an even worse feeling than the one before because my dad would wake up periodically, but my mom was just in her induced coma. And I remember it just being awful. We had to wait 7 days for them to take her out of the medically induced coma and the cold state she was in to see what her brain activity was like. I have a very small medical background. I was an EMT for a few years, so I knew enough just to be dangerous. But I had a horrible feeling for how long she was down without oxygen. And I remember on the seventh day, I got out of the car and a song came on that was called Just Remember I Love You and It'll Be All Right. And I felt like at that time my mom was sending me a message, and I knew she was gone. And I knew I was going to have to convince my other family members that it was okay to let her go. So when we went upstairs for the doctors to take her out of the medically induced coma, she immediately ceased. And I knew that my mom, as we knew her, was gone. She did have a directive that said that if she could not live a normal life and only on life support, that she did not want to live that way. And I had to explain to my family members that this is what that meant. And again, I was shouldering the responsibility because I had to do the same thing in Cleveland. And now I had to do the same thing in Charlotte with my mom. So again, once the decision was made that my mom was going to be taken off life support, everybody was allowed to visit her. So my aunt spent some time with my mom, my cousin, her friend that she was visiting. I had my kids just call and tell her they loved her because, gosh, again, I had to explain why I was away for 3 weeks again. And, they asked me if Nanny was going to be okay. And, I didn't want to tell them over the phone, but they knew, and it was so incredibly hard. And then, the day came where it was time to take her off the life support, and we were all in there with her, holding her hand, and it was very quick, very, very quick. And, the difficulty arose because she passed away out of state. We had to stay there long enough to arrange to get her cremated in the state of North Carolina. So, and then we had to have her remains sent home to us. We couldn't just drive them home. I don't remember all of the reasons why, but everything just seemed extra hard. And it just was. We were in a position again. Now, luckily, she was a little bit more organized and had a folder of numbers we needed to call. And, we got on that right away, and we had to make calls from her cell phone and just all of the necessary immediate phone calls to notify that someone is deceased. My brother and I had to drive back home in her car. Everything was just difficult because one day she was there and then she wasn't. She was a part of our business. We were in the middle of a business deal, 2 deals actually, and we had to try and figure out what to do. Looking back 5 years later, my brother and I both said we wish we would have hit pause and just not done the deals and taken some time to properly grieve. But, we thought we did what we needed to do at the time. So when we returned home to Florida, we now had to deal with my mom's estate as well. And again, my brother and I were both the personal representatives, figuring that out. And since he had just done the first part for my dad, he did that with my mom while I helped keep up more with the house. She had 3 cats that needed to be taken care of, plants that needed to be watered. So all of that was just something that had to be done. And, I just remember it being so, so hard. We had to find homes for the cats. I couldn't take them in. I had 2 dogs, 2 cats, 2 kids, and kids coming over all the time, and they were senior cats. My brother couldn't take them. He had 2 senior dogs and 2 senior cats, and it was just a lot. I remember when we started going through my mom's house, I was 39 at the time, and I told her she could plan my 40th party, and I wanted it to be flamingo themed. And throughout her house, I found all these hidden flamingo decorations. I remember a week after she passed, a package showed up at her house for me, and it was flamingo flip-flops. And that may have been one of the hardest packages I've ever received, just coming when it did. And all I can tell you is everything felt so heavy that it didn't matter what I did, that there was just a heaviness with all of it. I remember I would go for a walk and just break down in the middle of my walk from the grief, and everything in the world just seemed so different. Like the people around me didn't understand how sad and how heavy. That's the only way I can describe it, is how heavy everything could be. But, being a mom of 2 young boys, I had to power through and keep going. I had 2 estates to deal with and payments to make from it and my own house to keep up with. So my brother and I had some hard decisions to make. We decided to tackle my mom's house first because it was closest and she had pets. My aunt ended up taking the cats, so we had to get them back up to North Carolina. But we went into the house, we took things that we thought she'd want us to have or things that were special to us. We got a storage locker for things that we weren't sure what to do with. I mean, so many family photos. It was so hard. I remember we set someone on a lawn maintenance schedule. My husband was making sure the pool was taken care of. And at the time, I was still making sure the plants were getting taken care of. Meanwhile, we were lining up an estate company for an estate sale. My mom thought she had a lot of valuables in the house, and it turns out the things that she had for so many years just aren't worth what they were, back in the 90s. So my mom's house, we did ultimately decide to sell. I do have a video linked below about why we made the decision with her house and how that ended up. But we just didn't want to deal with renters in the house, living in the same neighborhood that the house was in, and constantly seeing it. And I'll tell you, 5 years later, it's hard enough as it is, still walking by the house, knowing it was hers. But I am able to walk by it now. And then my dad's house, we ultimately did decide to renovate it and rent it. Again, I have a video below of how that turned out. But the reason I'm making this video is to let you know that I understand that every decision you make right now might feel so heavy, or you're in a period in your life where things feel heavy, and maybe you don't know who to trust or you don't know what to do next. And these reasons are why I help families that are going through this now. We didn't know who to talk to in Cleveland, Ohio, and it would have been great if we could have gone on Google and found someone that did all these services. And here in Florida, we had to piecemeal things together. But, I know what it feels like to be sitting in your shoes, not knowing what to do next. So, if you're going through this right now, I've created other videos that walk you through the process step by step. And just so you don't have to do everything at once. And, take it one step at a day and do just a little bit of something. And that's what'll help get you through.